Hi, thank you for looking in on my channel. I'm really grateful. Don't forget that have a look at the channel. There are all sorts of different playlists with different subjects that I cover. Some talk about particular cases, there's some comedy stories, there's some difficult dilemmas, all sorts of different topics, and they're on different playlists. Anyway, many thanks to the people that have encouraged me to do a part 2 to my scandals and things that went wrong. I don't particularly want to talk too much about the police this time. I spoke quite a lot about the police last time, but I might talk about a particular case that's mentioned in my book that's quite interesting actually, and the result was actually, the end result was a lot of drugs were found, and you know, a drug gang was taken out actually from this story. But I might do a separate video about that. But I just want to recommend this book. It's called Broken Yard, and it's by Tom Harper, and I think it's really good. And some of the information that I discuss in my book correlates with Tom Harper. So, you know, I kind of, as a probation officer, people don't explicitly tell you stuff sometimes, but you stumble across scandals and things from time to time. The other book I want to recommend, and I'm sort of reading this at the moment, is called Crime to Crime by Sir Richard Henriques, who's been a judge, very senior judge. He's been a barrister over the years, and he talks about lots of different cases in a very down-to-earth way. But he also discusses, which I'll be discussing in this video a bit, is the mistakes made by politicians, and grailing in particular. Grailing caused a lot of damage, and I want to talk about that a bit. So scandals come, I mean, a lot of people imagine offenders as just being some sort of underclass, and, you know, but actually offenders can come from all walks of life. Just a quick reminder of the post office scandal, where lots of people were prosecuted really unfairly due to mistakes, and some people were sentenced to custodial sentences completely wrongly, and what an outrageous scandal that was. And on the front cover of my book was this lady here. You can see she worked for the post office. She was grandmother, and she was a precursor to all that scandal. And you can see little flowers there, and bless her, I got her doing a floristry course, a professional floristry course. So today I want to talk about how people come from all walks of life, and indeed I had to write a report about somebody who's very, very senior in British society, and I've changed all the names and the circumstances, and his offence was quite complex actually, but he was a very, very upper class person, I'll put it like that. And in my book I call him Lord Hanbury. And you know, he was a leading magistrate in my area, and he got caught up in a very, very serious crime, financial crime. And I didn't, at the time, it was quite complex and quite difficult to understand, but it was so serious that he was looking at imprisonment. And I remember saying to him, and probably as a magistrate, he didn't think twice about sending people down. And I remember saying to him, look, you know, I'm quite worried, but I think you're looking at a custodial sentence. How are you going to cope with prison? And you're going to start off in these old Victorian prisons, and then you might end up in an open prison. And he said, oh, don't worry, I've been to boarding school. It's just going to be like going back to boarding school. And I thought, that's interesting. But interestingly enough, the cost of sending somebody to Eton is less than sending somebody to prison, you know, and prison, you know, prison is pretty awful and not very highly resourced anyway. So, but there we are. So, like many other upper class people, as soon as he had to spend time in prison, I was quite pleased actually, because he was quite kindly towards some of the other inmates, and there's some people who are literate and things like that, and he sat there and helped them write letters. He took interest in others, and I thought that was good. The other thing was, when he came out, he said, well, you know, my whole view of prison's changed completely. I think it's terrible. It's a complete and utter waste of time. And he got involved with a charity called the Prison Reform Trust, who are brilliant, and I highly recommend looking them up. And, you know, there've been other people that have been like him, that have completely changed, you know. So one of them was quite a senior politician, a cabinet minister, Conservative, called Jonathan Aiken. And there were stories in the press of him conducting improper behaviour, really, and quite serious allegations. And he thought, well, I'm going to refute these. And he took the newspapers to court. And in doing so, he was found out to lie to the court, and it's called perjury. And they take it very, very seriously, actually, that the criminal justice system, that if you lie to the court, that you knowingly give a lie like that, it's called perjury, and you're looking at a custodial sentence. And that's what happened to Jonathan Aitken. He got 18 months imprisonment for perjury, and he, as a politician, he got up to all sorts of not particularly good things. Another one, who was deputy chairman of the Conservative Party, was Jeffrey Archer. Same story again, allegations in the press, he didn't like it, and he again perjured himself, and he got 4 years imprisonment for perjury. So that was quite serious indeed, wasn't it? So, and there've been other ministers. There was one who got his wife to lie that she was driving when it was in fact he was driving, and Chris Hume it was, and he was a minister, and that was the end of his career. So people come from all walks of life, and but for me, what was really outrageous was the expenses scandal in 2009, where so many people in the House Department were making inflated expense claims, and claims that they weren't justified in making. And there were all sorts of shenanigans going on. You know, there were people employing their wives as secretary when they went working. And it was so widespread, it was outrageous, but very few prosecutions followed. But, you know, it was just, and some of the expenses, what was happening was they were being revealed by the Daily Telegraph day by day. And the public were absolutely outraged, you know. There was one for a duck house and things like that. And I just thought it was terrible. And even, you know, just to give you an example sort of thing that was happening, Chris Grayling, who later became minister in charge of probation, he was claiming for a second house, they were given expenses to have a second house nearer the House of Commons, even though he only lived 17 miles away, door to door, from the Houses of Parliament, which, you know, so in other words, and I think he was renting one of his properties out to make money. And not good, is it? You know, and most of them who claimed all this money, inflated expense claims, were just made to pay the money back over claimed and to make an apology. So, you know, but one MP called Chris Chater claimed more than £20,000 in expenses fraudulently, and he got 18 months imprisonment. Another one got 16 months for fraudulently claiming 8,000. He was Elliot Morley. No, Elliot Morley got a year for fraudulently claiming £30,000. And two lords as well, Lord Hanningfield, Lord Taylor, were also sentenced, custodial sentences. And the whole expenses scandal has severely, severely tarnished the already poor reputation of politicians. And at the time, somebody said, statistically, you're more likely to come into contact with a criminal in the Houses of Parliament than you are in your local high street. And for me, it's just, you know, and I really feel there's something wrong with our political system in that we're a bit laissez-faire with them. We let them get up to their own devices, these politicians, and we don't really hold them to account. We don't really monitor what they're doing. And some people just vote for a particular party, and these MPs don't really do any surgeries or do much work for their local area. And I think somehow how MPs are selected and democracy needs to be looked at in this country, and we need politicians more responsive, not only to the electors that they're representing, but when they're ministers, I have grave doubts about their management of the ministries that they've been managing. And the way probation has been managed over the years, I have real worries, and I'm going to be sharing with you. So, talking about how people from all walks of life have got into trouble, well, they've been celebrities. Stephen Fry is one. He got imprisonment for fraudulently using someone else's credit card when he was young. Celebrity TV chef Gino D'Acampo was sentenced to 2 years for a burglary offence. Cheryl Cole was convicted for an assault. One Direction singer Louis Tomlinson was convicted for assaulting a paparazzi. Russell Brand as well. Stephen Gerrard got a conviction for assaulting someone in a nightclub. Boy George gained a conviction for assault and false imprisonment. But most worrying of all were, of course, the cases of Rolf Harris, Jimmy Savile and Gary Glitter, who all committed a series of sexual offences against minors and vulnerable individuals. So, most crime is committed by people at the bottom of society, and they're the people who are most severely punished very often. But their crimes occurring all over the place. There's one case in the 1990s called Lord Brockett, and what he did was he made false insurance claims. He was burying his classic car collection in the grounds of Brockett Hall, and made a false claim, and he got sentenced to custody. He had a really rough time because, he was kicked, punched and slashed with a razor and threatened and things like that in prison. He didn't have a good time at all. And when he was eventually released, he arranged for a motorbike to be dropped outside the prison, and he jumped on his motorbike with a helmet on and zoomed past all the assembled press, which I thought was quite good. So when I started back in probation in the 1980s, and I think back then we had, in some ways, quite a good setup, actually. And even though you'll get ministers from the same party being completely different, and the first big different one was a chap called Michael Howard, Conservative, and he started putting stories in the press that he was thinking of getting rid of probation officers, and that he was going to replace them with ex-army officers and things like that. He didn't like the idea of them being social workers. And his mantra was that prison works and that we should use prison more. And in fact, statistically, short sentences are much more likely to cause reoffending than somebody being placed on probation. So he was quite wrong in saying that, and he caused a lot of damage, really. The other thing he did was he brought in, if anybody committed a serious offence that you were supervising, he brought in these reviews where your files were seized and they were gone through in a file and you were held to account if something went wrong. And it came as a bit rich because it felt a bit like you were attending some sort of disciplinary interview. But not only that, we were all working extra hours than what we were being paid for just to cope with the workload that we were being given. And they wanted high standards when we weren't being paid to provide, we weren't being resourced to provide high standards. So, and that culture brought in a culture of fear, and I think it stopped probation officers taking a bit of a risk with offenders, and it made more recalls much more likely, I think, and that really, really worried me. So sometime later, another politician came in from a different party, and they funded more, but they said, we'll give you more funding providing you do these long and detailed risk assessments. And so my expertise was in motivating people to go in a straight direction and interfacing with them and talking with them. And more, I was spending time doing these risk assessments, massive, great big form on a computer, and it was taking hours. And it felt like we were becoming a risk form factory instead of working with people. And I think that was really regrettable. Then Chris Grayling came along and he tore the probation service apart, and it was absolutely chaotic what he did. He split the probation into two halves. He brought in supervision of all people on licence, which was ridiculous. And the split was a complete failure. And it's also mentioned in Richard Henriquez's book, but it was a complete failure. And it cost £467 million to put right. And I'm going to end on there. Have a think about that. And by the way, Chris Grayling has got promoted to the House of Lords, you know. So he made lots of other things. He cut legal aid, and the consequences of his behaviour of cutting legal aid and reforming the probation service, I think that the damage in some ways hasn't been repaired today, you know, even though probation's been renationalised. The big problem as well is often really good staff have left, you know. And anyway, all the very best, and thanks for looking in, and see you again. Bye.